Namaskar. First of all, I thank India Foundation and Ram Madhavji for giving me this opportunity. At the same time, I feel quite humbled to chair this kind of great panel at such an august gathering. The panelists, I don't think they require any introduction, especially to you. We have inimitable Tavleen Singh ji. We have feisty Madhu Kishwar ji. Patrick French. Until you read him, you will not believe what kind of poetry he writes in describing social realities. And of course, the adorable Amish, which everyone loves in our country. So these panelists, my job is very short with them, but I will say something about the topic. The topic is, or the term, pain warriors. It is not a very usual term. You will not find in dictionaries. In fact, it has been created by some warrior themselves. So the term is used in various ways, from positive, sometimes even reverential, as David Frawley coined another term for that, very positive, Bodhik Kshatriyas. This is one of the very positive connotation of the term. To indifferent. Oh, lekhak hai, likhta hai. And then sarcastic, Wag Bahadur, only brave with words and nothing for use. So with different sorts of pain warriors, you can have different views. But one thing is indisputable. That is about their tool, the words. The power of words have been recognized all over the world for all time. In fact, in Kathopanishad, it has been described, Shabda, as one of the 5 great gifts given by Paramatma to human beings. We use Shabda for sound as well as for words. And we know by our own experience, individual as well as historical, that words applied in a systematic, artistic, poetic way or in a particular way carry an independent force. Once expressed, either written or spoken, they acquire an independent autonomy. And then nobody knows how it will hit or affect whom in what way. In recent times, in recent history, when we are discussing pain warriors as well as literature, I cannot forget to mention the great, in fact, by the reckoning of the Time magazine, one of the greatest in the 20th century, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He used simple words, nothing but words. But his words shook the very foundation of a greatest empire in the 20th century. That was a kind of writer produced in a social system, the mighty Soviet Union, Communist Soviet Union. They could not withstand the words of Solzhenitsyn. Then we have other kind of pain warriors. Recently we have seen, in fact, it is still going on. Yesterday our president had to say something. The pain warriors, they are also a kind who are returning their awards, writers and intellectuals, some artists, to emphasize a kind of partisan politics. They are also the warriors. So we have a lot of situations with pen warriors all over the world. We have great writers with great ideas, great vision. We have good writers with bad ideas, ideologies. We have bad writers or speakers with good intentions. We have political propagandists, and I'm saying it with some responsibility, masquerading as scholars, eminent historians. In fact, one of our well-known sociologists called them academic gangsters even. So the list is endless. All kinds of warriors are there. And in view of this, in this context, at this great place, in this great gathering, I believe our panelists will contribute something which will carry with us. So I don't want to stay in between you and our great panelists. And I first invite Tavlinji. Thank you.
I have very bad cough, so in between, if I sound strange, you know why. I'm going to begin, and I mean this without intending to sound controversial or anything, but I think that in the interest of civilization, we have to begin by closing down the Sahitya Academy. Not just... No, listen, I'm not being facetious. Not just because they gave awards to some very bad writers, who returned them because, nobody had even heard that they'd got them in the first place. But that isn't the real reason why we should close it down. I believe, sorry, excuse me, everyone has their own different definition of what makes civilization. Mine is a country that has bookshops, libraries, because that's an indication of how educated, sorry, that's an indication of how educated the citizens of that country are. And by that definition, India, I hate to say this, Ram Madhavji, I hope you're not going to disinvite me next year, but by that definition, India is one of the most barbaric countries in the world. Before coming here to make this little speech, I Googled up the number of libraries in India, and I'm not sure I got the correct figure, but it's something like 58,000 or something as small as that for 1 billion people. For more than 1,025 crore people, we have 58,000 libraries, or anyway, I'm prepared to believe that figure even if it sounds as though it's too little, because I've never seen a bookshop or a library in an Indian small town. I've never seen a bookshop in a village, and I travel all the time because of my work, and wherever I go, I first ask to see the school, and then I ask if there's a bookshop or a library where, people can go without paying. And, they don't exist in India. Now, we heard in the earlier session about what a civilized country India is now, a great, magnificent civilization. Now, at one point, I hope in this magnificent civilization that in Ram's Ayodhya, there would have been libraries. There would have been bookshops. What is this an indication of? It's an indication of producing generations of uneducated Indians. And this, I very much fear, is what we've been doing, because after independence, we continued colonial education. Patrick, sorry, no reflection on the British, okay? But we continued with a system of education, of mass education, that the British created to turn India into a nation of clerks. We made no effort to change it. The result of this is that any poor child in India that is forced to go to a government school because he can't afford to go to private school comes out without being able to read a storybook. A simple storybook. It's impossible. So what do we mean by civilization? How can you talk about Sanskriti and Sanskar to a child who cannot read, who has no comprehension of what those words are? So for me, when I look around me, and in all these years of journalism, and there have been many years, the big change that I've noticed is that suddenly you've got in India, when I became a journalist, by the way, there were about 10 newspapers, mostly written in English, 2 in Hindi, a few there were some strong newspapers in Bengal and in Kerala, and maybe Maharashtra. But by and large, the media, the press, was a very small thing. You could count on the fingers of 2 hands the newspapers. Today, Dainik Jagran and Dainik Bhaskar have circulations that are bigger than any newspapers in the world, except maybe the Asahi Shimbun. So it's not as if there aren't readers. There are millions of readers, crores of readers. But the trouble is that because we've continued with the idea, with a colonized idea of India, we haven't made any effort to create the distribution systems, the publishing systems that would help writers writing in Indian languages to sell their books. So, you know, I mean, we remain one of the few countries in the world where if you go into even the big bookshops in India, the Indian languages will be in one little corner, one dusty little corner, where it's the books that nobody cares about. Now, you know, what are we talking about? How do we even dare to use the word civilization if that is what we're talking about? We're talking about newly literate Indians whose only communication with the world is going to be digital. You know, I mean, there are digital libraries, a very fine Urdu digital library has been created called Rekhta, but you have to have in schools books. And we don't have them. We don't have children who can read them. Now, you know, it goes a little bit beyond that. For me, I come from one of the most educated, I went to a very privileged little school for privileged little girls. And I came out of this school being unable to speak any other language. My first language is Punjabi. I spoke only Punjabi for 7 years. And then I went to school, and I was re-educated in the colonial way, and I came out speaking only English, not very well, not as good as Patrick's going to speak, but I spoke only servants' Hindi. I had to then, when I became a journalist, learn Hindi and Urdu and Punjabi, because 99% of the interviews that I did, 99% of the speeches that I covered were in Indian languages. So what I'm trying to say is that this elite, this award-returning community that is so excited about returning their awards, they constituted what, in my view, is an evil intellectual empire, where they kept out anyone who did not think like them, where they deliberately kept India illiterate, or at least colonizedly illiterate, and where what they did was they resisted anyone coming into the universities or building the schools. Do you know how hard it is to build a private school in India? I'm not sure of the number of permissions that you need now, but I talked to somebody a couple of years ago, and you need 60 permissions to set up a school. So, you know, I mean, it's very sad for me that after this government came in, the Ministry of Education was not created again. Rajiv Gandhi disbanded it and created this ridiculous Ministry of Human Resource Development, which contains culture and civilization and education. We need a Ministry of Education, not to create more schools, to improve government schools, to improve state universities, but to dismantle the license Raj that controls education in India. You cannot put up a private university. Ajit sitting over here, ask him the problems he's had creating any kind of private university. He has a college in Sangli where you need permission from, what is it, the NCERT? AICTE. So the controls are so strong that technically if you teach your son science at home, you are violating the laws of the AICTE because they inspect. So, you know, what we need, Ram Madhavji, it's my appeal to you as I conclude, that let's get back the Ministry of Education, to dismantle this evil kind of control system, this license Raj, that has kept India illiterate and that has not allowed anyone who privately wants to do anything to do anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Tavlinji. True to your reputation, you raised so many significant issues, especially the publishing system and distribution system, the state of bookshops or the absence of them. They are very important, and I hope through this it will go to the right places for discussion. For the next, I invite Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I had a couple of thoughts relating to things that Tavleen just said. About 10 years ago, I asked an official person about the 58,000 libraries, because like you, I wasn't sure there were, in fact, quite so many. And it turns out that the definition of what constitutes a library is a room containing 2 or more newspapers. On a more positive note, I think that books in Indian languages are a great deal more popular and more available than they used to be. I know that my own books have been translated into Hindi in particular, but some other Indian languages. But the crucial thing is it's not only about putting the books into bookshops, it's also about people buying them. It does depend on you, the reader, to make that aspect of the book industry succeed. So we're here to talk about all sorts of things: pen warriors, civilization, literary aspects. And as I was thinking about what to say, I remembered a conversation quite a long time back, consisting of me, somebody from India, and 3 people from Tibet. And they were Tibetans from Tibet. They weren't exiles like Sikyong La. And the Indian person there said in passing in conversation, this was in the United Kingdom, said, what do you think of your government's policy, the Chinese government's policy vis-a-vis India? And immediately those 3 Tibetans went into a huddle and they looked afraid because they were nervous that there could be a consequence if they gave the wrong answer. And that reminded me of my own time in communist countries, in Poland before the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, inside Tibet itself, where even to have a conversation, let alone an interview with somebody, and for that person to express their opinion freely, put you at very considerable risk and danger. And I have to say that having spent a long time now traveling in different parts of India and speaking to all sorts of people, ranging from politicians of all parties to Maoists in the jungle to Afzal Guru on death row in Tihar jail, nobody in India is short of an opinion. Everybody wants to express an opinion. Some people want to express several opinions. And I even have a theory that actually more words per capita are spoken per hour in India than anywhere else on earth. Because the reason for this is that in most countries, let's say you've got 4 people, the principle is that 1 person will speak and 3 will listen, whereas in India, 4 people can speak simultaneously. And yet, there is a perception, to some extent in India and certainly abroad, that freedom of speech is being curtailed in India and that tolerance is coming to an end. And one of the things that I like very much about this meeting and what the India Foundation are doing here is that they are trying to persuade people to get out of their trenches and listen to and exchange a broad range of opinions. I think there is a growing tendency, and this is something that applies to all ideologies now, that people tend to only speak to the converted. They tend not to open out to alternative points of view. Maybe this is encouraged by social media because it's much easier to be abusive to somebody who you've never seen if they're just a social media handle. Whereas if you met that same person in real life and had an exchange, you might find that there were perhaps 50% of the things you were discussing that you actually agreed on. So this thing of people being in silos, being in trenches, is a great pity, and I'm delighted that what's going on here is about opening out and listening to different points of view. And I think one of the difficulties in how the response has been handled to the returning of awards in particular, whether it's writers or scientists or historians or filmmakers, is that there's been an immediate tendency to doubt the motives of the people who are making those return of awards. They're accused of being paid money, or they're accused of being unpatriotic, or they're told that they're secular, or that they're prostitutes, or any of these other jargon words that are used in order to discredit somebody's opinion. Even the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, recently made a comment about tolerance, and he himself received that kind of abuse. Now, you could say that what you're seeing, and the reason behind this, is a kind of social churning. As the old establishment, the ancien régime in India, is displaced, and something new and generative and aspirational replaces it. And there may be some truth in that. But one of the things that has been strange to me in the last couple of days is the way that even people who I assumed would regard themselves as victorious, particularly after the overwhelming electoral mandate last year, still to some extent see themselves as victims. When there was the lunchtime discussion yesterday, which Vamsi Jaluri was doing, somebody there said, Hindus do not have human rights in the media in India, and that remark went almost unchallenged. And so it seemed there that in that point of view, it was almost as if India, the majority of Indians, the Hindu majority of 4 out of 5 Indians, is a kind of persecuted majority. So you have this strange situation where lots of people on different sides, the old left liberal establishment with all their privilege that Tavleen alluded to, the new government, who one might be assuming would be saying, like the British Labour Party after the great victory in the 1945 election, would be saying, we are the masters now, instead of saying, well, we feel on the back foot. We feel that our voice is not heard properly. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from a situation where everybody is feeling that their opinion is not being heard fairly, and that their pen warriors are, to some extent, being ignored or discarded or not treated with the reverence that they deserve? Well, here are some of my thoughts. One is that the return of awards is something with a long tradition in modern Indian history. You can have countless examples from the days of the freedom movement, Rabindranath Tagore or others who decided after the Amritsar massacre to return awards. And so what I would say is that whether or not you agree with the reasons why somebody is returning an award, that person does deserve to be treated with respect because they are following an Indian tradition of protest. Then you might say, well, a lot of these people anyway hate the new government. They received patronage from the Congress party in the past. They didn't do anything about events like the massacre of Sikhs in 1984. What about this or what about that? And I have to say my answer to that is, well, what about it? Are you going to say that the failures or the hypocrisies of others in the past provide some kind of moral example on which to base the present? Another argument is, well, these people are part of the old elite, they're part of Lutyens Delhi. But you know, I live in Lutyens Delhi, and I have to say that very few of the people who have returned awards are anything to do with Lutyens Delhi. The writers are writing in all sorts of Indian languages. They're writing in Gujarati, they're writing in Assamese, in Hindi, in Punjabi, and so on. And only a very small fraction of them are from that elite. Then you have the issue of the rationalist writers who have been murdered, Kalburgi, Pansare, Dabholkar, and the feeling of fear that that has instilled in some writers, the feeling of vulnerability. And I think it's crucial not to forget just how alone a writer can feel. A writer is not part of an institution. They don't have any institutional protection. It's simply that individual. And if you get into a situation where writers feel vulnerable, and the issue is not whether they are vulnerable, it's whether they feel vulnerable, then all sorts of things can start to go wrong. Once you give up the principle that the state should have a monopoly on violence, and instead you say, well, unfortunately this person was killed and who knows exactly how it happened. Once you go down that road, you make the fatal mistake of countries to the east and west of India who have got into that situation where you start to authorize certain opinions and certain ways of writing and certain ways of believing. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that India is in that position. You look at, for example, the way that Bangladeshi writers have been killed recently. I think that is quite different from what is happening in India. But what I do believe is that it is a slippery slope, and once you start to go down that road, it has a fatal and chilling effect on people's belief in the idea of freedom of speech. Now, in many respects, India remains a haven in Asia and in South Asia for the ability for people to gather in a place like this and say pretty much what they want to say. There have been all sorts of opinions expressed over the last 2-3 days, and nobody has shouted down that person or said that they should be dragged off the stage for expressing an opinion that they might disagree with. And I have to say, it did even cross my mind, talking of the idea of a Hindu Taliban, that I've noticed in Delhi and other parts of North India, there are a considerable number of Afghans who have actually moved to India, presumably because they feel that they have a greater opportunity than they would have if they remained inside Afghanistan, their own country. But what does this come back to? I think it really comes back to principles of freedom of expression, which have a very long lineage. When al-Biruni came to India nearly 1,000 years ago, and he made his notes and his observations on India, one of the things that he noticed was that people would dispute with words, but he used a phrase something like they would really very rarely risk their bodies or risk their lives in order to have an argument. And what he was really saying there was that the idea of heresy, the idea that there were certain positions that you could not take theologically or intellectually, was not something that applied in the Indian traditions or Indian religions of that time. So I think that really this idea of freedom of expression that people are so determined to hang on to is something that goes right back into India's prehistory. So here we are in the situation that we're in today. You have the odd echo chamber of social media. You have the vanity metrics of so many retweets or so many Facebook posts, things that are going to evaporate into the air within a matter of days or weeks or months or years. In 10 years' time, nobody is going to say, what was it that that person said? Are they even going to bother to retrieve the screenshots of long ago? And then when it comes to television, when it comes to newspapers, you have a situation where, again, this was a view that many people were expressing yesterday, the idea that there is a kind of left liberal conspiracy to run media organizations and that Hindu voices are treated unfairly. Now, there are efforts to change that. You get magazines like Swaraja being created in order to try to oppose what the creators see as the dominant narrative. And again, when it comes to television or literary festivals or think tanks, my view is that if you don't like the way things are, then you have to create something better as an alternative. And again, with novelists and writers, and you think of the people of Indian origin or the people from India who have global reputations, inevitably, in most cases, writing in English. You have what's described often as a cultural war or a civilizational war, but what is in fact very often a class war. In other words, it's people who come from very similar backgrounds who nearly always seem to have very similar opinions on political or ideological questions. And again, if you're not liking how that is and you want to change that, then you have to write the better novels to replace the existing dominant external narrative. Again, when it comes to historians, if you feel that India's history has been traduced, and you think that it's an external history or a colonial history, and it needs to be revised by digging back into the past and rediscovery, it is not to your benefit if an organization like the ICHR does not have somebody at the top of it who has an international reputation as a historian. Because inevitably the effect is that when you go to university history departments in foreign countries, as I quite often do, people do not say, well, I admire the quality of the research, I admire the methodology, I admire the monograph, I admire the peer-reviewed publication. but I disagree with some of the conclusions. Instead, they say, I don't know who these people are or what their training is or what their methodology is because I haven't seen their publications in the kind of forums that they need to be in order to change people's opinions. So my conclusion to what I've been saying today, when it comes back to the question of civilization and learning from civilization, is three things. First, no regime can go after its writers or be perceived to be going after its writers successfully. All successful regimes have allowed writers to flourish. And in 2015 and onwards, it is simply impossible to suppress those voices anyway. Now, you might say, well, the regime or the governing power is not going after those writers. But perceptions and narratives are what you have to address. The fact is that in many foreign countries, that is the perception, that is the narrative. And if you want to change it, it has to be changed more convincingly. Second, that you cannot create the future by relitigating the past. There are a lot of debates going on now about figures from history and where they stand politically today. It might be Sardar Patel, who, for all we know, might be helping to run the India Foundation if he was still with us today. But equally, after he got his qualification in London, he might have stayed there and led a very different life. You even get it with Tipu Sultan, people saying that he stood for certain things, and therefore, in the context of the present, he must stand for certain things. But the fact is, of course, that these people are history because they are history. We don't know exactly what they would stand for in an entirely different political, ideological, or cultural context. And finally, I believe that all the great civilizations of history look outwards. All civilizations avoid looking inwards. All great civilizations are receptive to external forces, external influences, and external voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. In a short time, very profound observations you made, and we can all agree that a comparative perspective gives original ideas. Thank you. Now we may request Madhuji. Thank you.
Friends, I've had 3 sleepless nights because of bronchitis, coughing all night. I just hope I can be coherent and get across all that I have to without losing track of my own thoughts. I would like to start off by thanking Ram Madhavji and Shaurya Dole for this largest gathering I know of non-left pen warriors. कलम के सिपाही भी हैं यहाँ और वाक विद्या के भी सिपाही हैं और इसको लेफ्टिस्ट तो डब कर देंगे कि आप इलिबरल वगैरह वगैरह पर मेरे अनुभव में इससे ज़्यादा कोई लिबरल गैदरिंग मैंने नहीं देखी जहाँ मुझे डर नहीं लग रहा कि मैंने कोई पॉलिटिकली इनकरेक्ट बात कर दी तो ज़िंदगी भर के लिए अनटचेबल हो जाऊंगी जैसा लेफ्टिस्ट करते आए हैं हमारा जो द इंडिक यूनिवर्स वी नो I mean, the inaugural day had a lot of very interesting lectures on what's special about this civilization. And I would say the Indic universe hosted a great civilization because in this land, new ideas came seamlessly in wave after wave. They jostled with each other freely, confronted each other, organized public debates. We know about our famed tradition of Shastrats, demanded and received due space without any idea or ideology being forced down people's throat with the help of a sword, or any idea wanting to establish supremacy and exclusive allegiance. सभी ने अपनी अपनी जगह मांगी सबको मिलती गई वेदांत है बुद्धिज्म आई जैनिज्म आई सिखिज्म आई एथिस्ट भी अपनी बात करते रहे चारवाक्स भी तांत्रिक्स भी भक्ति सूफी ट्रेडिशन कितने वेव आफ्टर वेव आइडियाज़, नए आइडियाज़ की, और नए नए गॉड्स और गॉडेसेस आए दिन अवतार होते रहते हैं। कभी तो बॉलीवुड फिल्म भी संतोषी माँ का अवतार करवा देती हैं, और किसी पुराने गॉड या गॉडेस ने कहा तुम कहाँ से आ गई, तुम्हारे लिए जगह नहीं है, ये कहाँ से नई इजाद हो गई। और सबसे बड़ी बात है, नन क्लेम्ड एक्सक्लूसिव लॉयल्टी or predominant position. And I would say this Indic universe, or India as we know today, is the only place where even Shias and Sunnis coexist more or less peacefully. और बताइए दुनिया में कहाँ ऐसा होता है. Now, wave after wave, we also know of persecuted people came here. Parsis, Jews, Baha'is, Afghans, Bangladeshis, Burmese, Tibetans, Sri Lankans. वो भी अपने अपने आइडियाज़ लेके आए और सबने अपनी अपनी जगह अपनी अपनी फॉलोइंग बनाई. दिस इज़ ऑल्सो, I think, the only land which witnessed wave after wave of brutal conquests, invasions, colonization, centuries of colonization, yet retained its sense of linguistic, cultural, religious identity. उस दिन चीफ मिनिस्टर गोवा ने कहा कि 450 साल पोर्चुगीज़ यहाँ रह के गए, और फिर भी 2-3% से ज़्यादा लोग पोर्चुगीज़ नहीं पढ़ते, अपनी कोंकणी में ही रूटेड रहे. Even conversions, I think this is the only land which did not witness wholesale conversions. आप अफ्रीका का देखिए, लैटिन अमेरिका का देखिए, क्या हाल हुआ. wholesale conversions यहाँ नहीं हुए. And I think India may have lost the battle of the sword, may have been defeated militarily time and again, but it resisted intellectually and with counter universe of ideas. It never succumbed totally. And also, conversely, ideas from India didn't go with one sword in one hand. जैसे कहते हैं कि बाइबल एक हाथ में और तलवार दूसरे हाथ में लेके निकले थे क्रूसेडर्स. यहाँ ऐसा नहीं हुआ. चाहे बुद्धिज़्म या इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ हिंदुइज़्म इन द एंटायर ईस्ट एशिया universe never went with sword. And the world came to us not just in search of material wealth, but also in search of new ideas, new inventions in science, technology, and whatnot. It's also important to know and remember that heretics, so-called heretics, were never punished or sent to the gallows. किसी गैलीलियो को यहाँ फांसी नहीं दी गई, और कभी भी रिलीजन साइंस के आड़े नहीं आया, साइंस के रास्ते में कि आप ये नहीं कह सकते क्योंकि वगैरह वगैरह. हमारी इस पुस्तक में ये लिखा है, and that's the final truth. There is no final truth. And that's why in India we have hundreds of versions of Ramayana. किसी की हिम्मत नहीं हुई कहने की कि वाल्मीकि जी लिख गए, इसके बाद नहीं. कोई भी लिख दे अपनी रामायण, और सैकड़ों रामायणें भी लिखी गई. जैन रामायण अलग है, कंबन की अलग है, श्रीलंकन अलग है. हर एक, इवन फोक रामायण, कोई आम औरतें किसी गांव में अपनी रामायण रच देती हैं. उनको राम का व्यवहार पसंद नहीं आया अगर सीता के साथ, तो उन्होंने राम को एक नए रूप में कि भाई हमें पसंद नहीं और तुम ज़रा सुधर जाओ और हमारी सीता के साथ ये नहीं करना. और आपने देखा कितनी रामायणें, कितनी वर्जन्स ऑफ महाभारत, और किसी ने फुल स्टॉप लगाने की कभी कोशिश नहीं की. पर ये जो सारा सिलसिला चलता रहा, विचारों के मंथन का, विचारों के फ्लावरिंग का, और कलम के सिपाहियों का, ये ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियलिज्म के साथ कुछ इसमें बहुत गड़बड़ियाँ आई. And I think it's with British colonialism that we began the process of losing the battle of ideas and scholarship. Even though the ordinary people of India stayed far more rooted in their traditional wisdom, in their ideas, in their way of life, but it's the intellectual elite, the English educated progeny of Macaulay, that brought about India's defeat, and more so after we gained political independence. during the freedom struggle, we fought the British colonial rule, the mighty empire of the British, with indigenous ideas. Mahatma Gandhi, for instance, provided the last big intellectual challenge India offered to the narrow parochial thinking of the West. It's therefore not surprising that the uniquely Indian political weapon that Gandhi forged to fight British colonialism, namely Satyagraha, the idea of Satyagraha, deeply rooted in the Indian tradition. There's a whole history of that tradition of Satyagraha in dealing with ruler-ruled relationship. And Dharampalji has done a brilliant book called Civil Disobedience and the Indian Tradition. Now that tradition of Satyagraha has provided a role model for people across the globe. Think of any outstanding global statesperson or freedom fighter. If they are respected, one thing is clear. They owe allegiance to Gandhi, and they owe it openly, publicly. They express their gratitude for having gained from Gandhi. Now, Gandhi could do that because despite his brief forays into Gora Sahib's culture, he went to become a barrister, he luckily remained culturally rooted. And I would say what helped Gandhi stay quintessentially Indian, what saved him were his 4 vows to his mother. You remember? बाहर जाने विदेश जाने से पहले माँ ने कहा था अच्छा भाई जाते हो पर एक बात है 4 चीज़ें मत करना और माँ को शराब नहीं पीऊँगा औरतों के साथ अयाशी नहीं करूँगा और क्या मांस नहीं खाऊँगा वगैरह वगैरह. You know, we don't need to go into the merits of those vows. The fact is, अगर गांधी ने वो नहीं मेंटेन किए होते तो नेहरू के जैसे ब्राउन साहब बन के ही लौटते. और आप सोचिए हिंदुस्तान का क्या हाल हुआ होता अगर गांधी भी ब्राउन साहब बन के लौटे होते. और I emphasize the vows to the mother and the importance of them, because this very idea that माँ का दर्जा भगवान के दर्जे से भी ऊपर है और माँ को दिया शब्द सेक्रेड है, ये बहुत हमारे ट्रेडिशनल कल्चर के में बहुत डीप रूटेड है. और अगर अंग्रेज़ बन गए होते गांधी तो किसी साइकेट्रिस्ट के पास लोगों ने भेज दिया होता ये तो भाई इसको इडिपल कॉम्प्लेक्स है, अभी भी माँ के दामन से छूटने की कोशिश नहीं कर रहा. तो पर गांधी के जाने के बाद वी नो नेहरूवियन इंडिया, Tavleen has already hinted on it, talked about it, the Macaulay system of education, which meant English medium education in a few elite institutions for the children of the rich and upper castes, and for the rest, kachra. सरकारी स्कूल सिस्टम चाहे वो किसी भी भाषा में दें, हमने देखा कि उसका नतीजा क्या हुआ है. We have produced, India has produced the largest population of linguistic cripples. India is the only country in the world where the educated elite can't write 2 sentences in their mother tongue. They're illiterate in their mother tongue. और ये educated होने का एक symbol बन गया है. मदर टंग भी नहीं, वे लिखना पढ़ना उसमें नहीं आता. और जो जानते हैं मदर टंग वो भी लिखने पढ़ने में जो क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन है वो, as I said, we are producing linguistic cripples. And how do linguistic cripples produce great ideas? How do they become warriors? I mean, I, as editor of Manushi, used to get articles and submissions from PhDs, utter gibberish. ना अंग्रेज़ी आती है, ना मराठी सीखनी है, ना हिंदी तो मतलब नौकरों की भाषा मान ही ली है. तो हालत यह है कि हिंदुस्तान ही एक ऐसा अनोखा कंट्री है, 2 देश है, जहाँ यहाँ का इंडियन हिस्ट्री भी अंग्रेज़ी में लिखी जाए तो हिस्ट्री मानी जाएगी. इंडियन सोशियोलॉजी भी अंग्रेज़ी में ही जर्नल्स होंगे. इंडियन साइंस भी, इनको या साइंस भी, कोई आप बता दीजिए, कोई जर्नल हिस्ट्री का, कोई जर्नल पॉलिटिक्स का, कोई जर्नल साइंस का, सोशियोलॉजी का, जो किसी भी इंडियन लैंग्वेज में निकलता हो, अगर अंग्रेज़ी में नहीं है तो उसको स्कॉलरली माना ही नहीं जाएगा। और अंग्रेज़ी नहीं आती अगर आपको, तो आप बैकवर्ड हैं। बहुत सिंपल, यू आर ट्रीटेड एज गुड एज इलिटरेट। You may be a scholar in any regional language, but you will not qualify for any respectable job if you simultaneously don't know English. Along with it, so all the knowledge repertoire that we had in our own languages, we shoved it aside, we didn't pay attention, we didn't nurture that knowledge. Also, along with it, हमारे जो traditional technologies, the weavers who made the, they are not just artisans, they are technologists. Weavers, goldsmiths, ironsmiths, all those people who created the wonders that India was known for. Your Banarsi silks and the Kanjivarams and the great architecture, the Sthapati Shastra. इन सब कास्ट एंड कम्युनिटीज़ को, अपनी सारी प्रोडक्टिव कास्ट और कम्युनिटीज़ को आपने बैकवर्ड, मोस्ट बैकवर्ड, स्पेशली बैकवर्ड कह के डब कर दिया। यानी वो सारा नॉलेज पूल आपने नकार दिया। क्यों? क्योंकि वो अंग्रेज़ी में नहीं लिखा गया। उनकी नॉलेज पूल जो है, हेरिटेज जो है, वो अंग्रेज़ी में नहीं थी, तो आपने कह दिया ये सब बैकवर्ड है। Now, how does a society which demeans its own great civilizational heritage of knowledge in technology, in science, in art, in literature, produce great new ideas when you do this? And it's not surprising that you have great eminent historians of ancient India who know neither Sanskrit nor Pali nor Tamil, but great eminent historian है संस्कृत के, ancient India के। और हमारी जो study of even our ancient texts, गीता प्रेस की रामायण पढ़ो तो आप बैकवर्ड मम्बो जम्बो पढ़ रहे हो, पर शिकागो यूनिवर्सिटी से निकाली गई महाभारत रामायण पढ़ो तो आप स्कॉलर हो। Now this, the result is that whatever interpretation is coming from Western universities, we accept that as given. Recently, CSDS, where I'm a professor, decided कि ये हम पे बहुत चार्ज आता है कि हमें अपनी एंशियंट ट्रेडिशन का पता नहीं, तो हमें थोड़ी संस्कृत और पुरानी टेक्स्ट पढ़नी चाहिए। तो उन्होंने तय किया हमें मनुस्मृति पढ़नी है और हमने फलां ढिम का 1-2 टेक्स्ट पढ़नी है। और ये पढ़ने के लिए उन्होंने किसी बनारस के स्कॉलर को नहीं बुलाया, विदेश से आए 3 अमेरिकन आए, वहाँ के पढ़े हुए, वहाँ के प्रोफेसर हमको हमारी टेक्स्ट पढ़ाने के लिए आ रहे हैं। और नतीजा क्या है कि जो भी उनकी इंटरप्रिटेशन है, उन्होंने कहा तुम्हारे ये लिटरेचर में है कि तुम बंदर थे। तो हमने कहा जी हम बंदर थे। क्यों? क्योंकि यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ शिकागो ने कह दिया कि आप बंदर थे। तो ये करने से हमने जो अपनी लैंग्वेजेस के साथ अन्याय किया, अपने कल्चरल हेरिटेज के साथ अन्याय किया, एज अ रिजल्ट द कैचमेंट एरिया फॉर न्यू आइडियाज़, नए कलम के सिपाही का जो कैचमेंट एरिया था बहुत ही सिकुड़ गया। और हमारे लेफ्टिस्ट भी, चलो लेफ्ट कहते हैं, अपने आप को सबाल्टर्न स्टडीज़ कभी करते हैं, मार्क्सिस्ट कहते हैं, तो क्लास, उनका डिस्कोर्स भी आप बताइए आज तक कोई भी डिस्कोर्स हिंदुस्तान की मिट्टी से पैदा हुआ हो? दे बिल्ट ऑफ कोर्स ऑन द कॉलोनियल डिस्कोर्स ऑफ हिस्टोरियोग्राफी, उसके ऊपर डाल दिया मार्क्सिस्ट। और मार्क्स का तो आपको मालूम है कि हज़ारों मील दूर बैठ के उसने तय कर दिया इंडिया वॉज अ सोसाइटी अनचेंजिंग, ब्रूटल, दिस दैट एंड द अदर। कभी शक्ल नहीं देखी हिंदुस्तान की, पर लेबल तो चिपका दिया, अनचेंजिंग है और बहुत रेजिस्टेंट है वगैरह वगैरह, स्ट्रेटिफाइड, oppressive, unequal. मार्क्सिस्ट के बाद अभी सबाल्टर्न स्टडीज़ वाले आए या जो भी आए, एक चीज़ जुड़ी रही, इन सब के कॉमन थीम है, नए नए इंटेलेक्चुअल फैशंस आते हैं, नए नए गाने गाए जाते हैं, पर उसमें एक चीज़ कॉमन थ्रेड उनमें है, डेफर्मेशन of Indian society and projection of it as hierarchical, oppressive, internally divided, rigid. We never told what united us as a glue. We are only told what divided us. And those two, the whole theory of fault lines, finding fault lines, both real and imaginary, how they are created and how they are, we know how this big fault line of the Aryan versus non-Aryan was created, figment of imagination, but it acquired such deep roots that even today it is influencing and determining the politics of India between certain castes, between tribals and non-tribals. और हिंदुइज्म के प्रति तो जो नफरत भाव छोड़ गए हमारे कॉलोनियल रूलर्स, वो आज और मजबूत होता जा रहा है. और इसके पीछे कारण है, और जो कारण मैंने पहले भी हिंट किया, वो बुनियादी कारण की एक यही कल्चर रहा जो होलसेल कन्वर्जन्स नहीं स्वीकार कर पाया. और उसमें सबसे बड़ी क्योंकि रुकावट आई जाति एंड जॉइंट फैमिली सिस्टम, जाति प्रथा. क्योंकि आप जाति से बहिष्कार हो जाएंगे ये सोच के बहुत से लोग रुके रहे. एटमाइज्ड फैमिलीज, न्यूक्लियराइज्ड फैमिलीज, वो आसान होता है कन्वर्जन्स. तो इसलिए a very caricature version of the jati pratha and the caste system has become not just politically fashionable but an article of faith. Now, on all of this, see, the Congress party, if you watch the politics that they've played, why is it कि सारे अवार्ड वापसी वाले कांग्रेस की धुन पे या लेफ्ट की धुन पे ये कर रहे हैं? Why is it that the outrage is so selective? Okay, very quickly. Because कांग्रेस ने पूरी इंटेलेक्चुअल एंडेवर्स आउटसोर्स कर दी लेफ्ट को. एक नूरुल हसन ने पूरी फौज तैयार कर दी जब वो एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर थे कांग्रेस के लिए. फिर जो कसर बची थी अर्जुन सिंह ने पूरी कर दी. कैसे उन्होंने बहुत क्लेवरली एजुकेशन मिनिस्ट्री को इस्तेमाल किया एंड कंपेयर इट विद व्हाट बीजेपी इज डूइंग, एंड देन यू नो कि आपके पास कलम के सिपाहियों की क्यों कमी है. और आज सारे बैटल वही लड़ रहे हैं हमारे defamation campaign. We know how dissent was manufactured, but very quickly I would want to give you an example that not many have noticed, and then conclude very quickly with this example. कैसे इस समाज को डिफेम करने का सिस्टमैटिक चलता जा रहा है. ऑनर किलिंग्स और खाप पंचायत की कंट्रोवर्सी के बारे में सब जानते हैं, और हम में से बहुत सारे भी जुड़ गए क्योंकि लिबरल लेफ्ट इंटेलिजेंसिया ने उसके डिस्कोर्स डिसाइड किया. आपको honor killings in fact became synonymous with Khaps, and some of these liberal radicals went to Supreme Court to say कि ये बहुत barbaric medieval practice है, खापों को बैन कर दिया जाए. किसी ने जाके पता भी नहीं किया खाप चीज़ क्या है, बल्कि कई न्यूज़पेपर कमेंटेटर्स ने यहाँ तक कहा ये खाप है क्या, हमें तो पता भी नहीं था, कहाँ से आ गए, होते कौन है. Now, this is a millennia-old institution of self-governance. Honor killings हुए और आपने कहा खापों को बैन कर दिया जाए क्योंकि ये कैंगरू कोर्ट्स करते हैं. मैंने उनका खुद का स्टडी किया लिटरेचर, और खाप वालों के साथ जाके बैठे. इनकी खुद की पिटिशन में सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये स्पष्ट है, जो डेटा उन्होंने प्रेजेंट किया, केवल 3% of honor killings are attributable to Gotra issue related to Khaps. Rest are all to do with religion, rest are all to do with caste, class, regional differences. किसी की ये हिम्मत है कि अगर कोई मुस्लिम फैमिली मर्डर कर देती है उनकी लड़की किसी हिंदू के साथ भाग जाए कि रिलीजन को बैन कर दो, कह के तो देखें, पर खाप को बैन कर दो। और ये भी लिबरल डिस्कोर्स का हिस्सा है। A millennia-old institution which has a history of doing enormous good. Yes, some people within CAPS did murder, but their own evidence says families murdered. कोई खाप बैठी हो और खाप ने ऑर्डर दिया हो, ऐसा कोई एविडेंस वो खुद नहीं प्रोड्यूस कर पाए। The tragedy is that everybody brought this discourse lock, stock and barrel. And when I studied the whole petition, saw the Beimani, talked to the people of Khap panchayats, held meetings of them, I decided कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जो तैयार हो गया था लॉ बैन करने का, अच्छा बीफ बैन करो तो आफत है, पोर्नोग्राफी बैन करो तो आफत है, पर खाप बैन करो, which means right to association, which is a fundamental right, वो बैन करो तो बड़ी लिबरल बात है। Liberalism in India is so authoritarian because it's totally insists, this is the only discourse which insists we want exclusive allegiance, जो हम कहें वो मानो, नहीं तो आप backward, नहीं तो आप modern India में रहने के लायक नहीं। Now, interestingly, when I decided to go to the Supreme Court, which was going to pass a law in absentia against the CAPS, no lawyer, including BJP, मीनाक्षी लेखी जी को कहा कि प्लीज़ कि प्लीज़ हमारे लिए अपीयर हो जाइए, बोली मैंने पॉलिटिकल सुसाइड करनी है, I'll be dubbed forever. So anyway, I appeared in person on behalf of CAPS, and we persuaded the Supreme Court, in absentia आप ये नहीं कर सकते. Then look at the evidence. You passed a law banning even gatherings of families, not passed, they were ready with the law. The Law Commission had come up with a law. The point is that with this one incident, you know how liberals manufacture a discourse, not just on issues of tolerance, very intolerant discourse, defaming, demonizing Indian society, and picking up, अभी कोर्ट भी इतने गलत फैसले देता है, कोई नहीं कहता कोर्ट को अबॉलिश कर दो, पुलिस थानों में इतनी ज्यादती, yeah, I'll just end up now. Now, my request to all of us is we have to invest in creating world-class institutions for defining our own discourse. And the easiest way to put an end to this derivative discourse, defamation campaigns that are inflicted on us repeatedly, is to ban foreign funding of scholarship and NGOs in India. Create a huge fund, invite even foreign scholars, को हम पे करेंगे, पर हमें अपने एजेंडा तो डिफाइन करने दो. वो कैसे एजेंडा डिफाइन करते हैं? Suddenly Ford Foundation give a lot of money for conflict studies, for some kind of facade studies. और हमारे सारे लग जाते हैं पाइड पाइपर की तरह, क्योंकि पैसे का सारा खेल है. तो आप यहाँ पे सिस्टम्स क्रिएट कीजिए ताकि लोगों को वहाँ ना जाना पड़े भीख का कटोरा लेके. अगर कोई स्टडी करनी है, then we are able to define our own agendas and produce a new breed of scholars which are rooted both culturally and linguistically in this country. Thank you.
धन्यवाद मधु जी. समय की कमी थी, अन्यथा आपने बहुत गंभीर बातें उठाई. भाषा और ज्ञान हमारे देश में माना जाता था कि ज्ञान का अहंकार होता है. आपने बताया कि एक बड़ी जमात ऐसी पैदा हुई है जिसे अज्ञान का अहंकार है. धन्यवाद. Now, everybody is waiting for you. Amish, please.
Hi, namaskar. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you so much, Ram Madhav ji, Shaurya, India Foundation for creating this wonderful forum. Before I begin, if I can ask you guys with a show of hands, how many of you have eaten at a French cuisine restaurant? How many of you? Okay, quite a good number. Now you know what the... Oh, you too? Brits eating? Okay, I thought you hated the Frenchies. French, Patrick French. Or a traitor from the surname, man. You know what the experience is like when you go to a French restaurant? Because the menu is scary. You know, when you start reading the menu, समझ में नहीं आता है साला खाना है क्या? You know, what is the food? You can't understand the description. And I have to be honest, you know, I was one of the backbencher students in college. So normally I found out the syllabus just 2 days before the exam. So I saw the topic that I was supposed to speak on yesterday, and I have to be honest, at the first look, I thought, wow, this is like a French menu, मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, बोलना क्या है? But then just like in a French menu, when you actually try and translate the words and go a little deeper, you understand there's actually a lot of creativity in that cuisine. And I realized that even in this topic, there's actually a lot of depth. And depth that should be discussed and debated. Pen warriors. The way I see pen warriors is pen warriors are instruments of change. They're instruments of culture. How so? The stories that emerge from the pens of pen warriors work as agents of outrage at times, work as agents of love at times, work as agents of culture at times. In all forms, they end up causing some change. Sometimes the ink that emerges from a pen is also a cause of outrage. Sometimes there was an incident that had happened recently in Mumbai. We were told that was the first time it had ever happened, but I had studied in Calcutta, and I can tell you there's a rich tradition in India of ink not remaining inside the pen, actually. And in Calcutta, it was actually quite common. How do stories cause change? How do they? I think perhaps the best, one of the finest lines I had seen on an approach to stories was by Muriel Rickeser. She had said the universe is actually not made up of atoms. The universe is actually made up of stories. All of us have our own stories. All cultures have their own stories. And it's a carrier of culture. It's a carrier of historical memories, a carrier of our memories. And stories cause changes in different ways. And for that, I think perhaps we should look at our ancient past and think of philosophies of understanding how change happens. And one way to look at it is to look at elements. In our ancient past, they'd said that if you should look at elements and understand how change happens, and we can learn from them. And they approached it with 4 elements: earth, fire, water, wind. Earth is the recipient of change. It receives change. And the other 3 elements are the causes of change: fire, wind, water. And it's very interesting to see the characteristics of those 3 elements and how they cause change on earth. The wind, you know, it erodes earth, it erodes it quite rapidly, but the wind is completely unfocused. It goes all over the place. And there are stories which work like the wind. They cause change, but they're all over the place, there's no focus. The other element to see is fire. It causes very rapid change. It's fast, it's passionate, but it burns itself out very rapidly. Does fire cause lasting change on earth more often than not? No. There are stories and pen warriors who write stories in that way. Do they cause lasting change? Perhaps not. And then there's the water. It's polite, sheetal hai, but it keeps hammering away and it's focused. And it can clear out entire mountains. And our ancients told us that for long-term change to happen, it has to be like water. Incremental, small changes, politely, without causing unnecessary opposition, but hammering away with focus. And you can clear out entire mountains. If you approach this way of change making, then how do stories cause change? What kind of stories have worked like water? Can movies ever cause change like water? No. Because a movie's life is 2 weeks. 95% of a movie's revenue is in that first week. By the second week, it's out. Naya movie aa jayega. But if there's a story theme which runs through the movies, through many movies, then it can cause some lasting cultural change. Like, for example, many people who follow Hollywood movies believe this fiction that the French are very rude. Because all Hollywood movies show that. Actually, if you go to France, they're just like us. There are some who are rude, some who are not. Bollywood movies, have a very appalling way of showing women. It's something that upsets me a great deal. The way wooing is done, it's almost like harassment. It's like stalking. And there are many men. I know I studied in, institutions where many of the people who are engineers, many of them, the only women they interact with are members of their family. So they actually believe what they see in the Hollywood movies. Ki ladki ki naam mein haan hai. Many of them actually believe this nonsense. Now, so many Bollywood movies, one after the other, have followed that same troubling storyline. So it's become a part of culture. And if you follow that water example, which is what brings me to the final point, that books work like water. Because books don't sell for just 2 weeks. Books sell for years and years and years. At least books that work. And they end up working like water and cause lasting change because they're slow, they're gentle, and they keep hammering away. And this is a power that writers of books have, and it's something that perhaps we should be conscious of. And when we look at pen warriors, obviously they're instruments of culture, and let's look at 2 examples, because the point in a war is that there are often many sides, and they debate with each other, they fight with each other. And like in any war, things change. No side wins forever. It doesn't happen that way. Pen warriors can work as people who immortalize real warriors, or they can work as people who bury real warriors. They work often with real warriors. There are pen warriors who can create fictional warriors as well. Like, for example, the fictional warrior Aryan race, that we are told of. And it's very interesting because I had read an interview recently, when battles change, obviously, like in any war, sides change and people try and pull back. I had read an interview very recently of Mrs. Romila Thapar in The Hindu. And it was very interesting because she's championed the Aryan invasion theory for so long. And then in this interview, she said that, does it really matter if the Aryans actually came? And I was kind of intrigued because here's a historian saying, does history really matter? But this is the way of pen warriorship, and it's something that perhaps all of us should learn as well. There are real warriors who believe that this will be the final war and we will win forever. There are some Europeans who believe that about World War I, and they believe that World War II will be the war to end all wars. Real life doesn't really work like that. And it works in the war for ideas as well, with pen warriors. There is an old regime, and their ideas are, one has to be honest, they're losing out. It may not be so obvious to them, but the younger you go, you find that thoughts are actually quite different. We saw a wonderful session yesterday, which challenged the received wisdom that apparently socialism and celebrating poverty is in the last 70 years, we've been taught this fiction that celebrating poverty is the true Indian culture, which is, anyone who knows real Indian culture knows that that theory is nonsense. Indians believe that wealth has a role to play as well, but they approach it from a dharmic perspective. There's no extremism of any kind. But there is a new generation of pen warriors who are bringing out new stories. But even this generation has to realize, and all of us have to realize, that the war of ideas never really ends. And you have to keep that in mind when you raise your points as well. There is no war to end all wars. Sides keep changing, things go up and down, and you have to have a sense of perspective and a sense of humility when you approach and market your ideas. No one is the source of final truth. No one. And that is the fundamental wisdom of the Indian way. There is no absolute truth. All of us have our own interpretation of it, which means that we shouldn't unnecessarily judge those we are fighting against. Have that sense of perspective. That is the true Indian wisdom. And I think that's what I realize is the true depth of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Amish. True to your storytelling way, you explained a deep philosophy in very simple terms and in a very short time. Thank you very much. Since we have very short time, we can take just 2 or 3 questions at best. Okay, you ma'am.
Just
Nivedita, behind Nivedita.
Just.
I have a comment and a question, Mr. French, please. You said that Lutyens basically does not decide how the country is run. Incorrect. I say that as somebody who was born, brought up, and fought an election from Lutyens, Delhi. A few drawing rooms who have decided how the country would be run today are being challenged and questioned by the millions of Indians who are tired. This entire intolerance debate is a result of that. Trust me, it's a sham. Now, that freedom of expression, which is our right, of the millions of Indians who are questioning this coterie of Lutyens drawing rooms who have run the country to disarray, absolute disarray. These people are the class which are not being heard. Now, my question to you. You said that awardees who are returning the awards deserve respect. Well, actually, what do you say about those 12 national awardees who returned awards endorsing lack of merit of a handful of students refusing to pass out a graduation degree for almost a decade? You are British, I believe. I studied in England. No university in England would actually keep any student for over 2 months if they refuse to pass a degree. Your comments, please.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So then
my question is actually also for Patrick. Patrick, if sort of, I actually happen to agree with you that you should treat your opponents respectfully even if you disagree with them. However, if in this case you believe that there is a false narrative of intolerance, that it's not based on reality, what in your way would in fact be the smart way to counter what you see as a false narrative of intolerance?
any more? Anirban?
I want to
Please
make
be
it-
brief.
Yeah. Okay, I'll be as brief as possible. I'm an admirer of Patrick. In fact, Liberty or Death really inspired me when I was 21 years old, even though his narrative was slightly different in that. I just want to make 2 brief points, and Nupur has already made that. One was that Tagore returned his knighthood, but he did not return his Nobel Prize. And in the last 100 years, if you take 1913 to 2015, you have only cited Tagore, who has returned an award. He returned his knighthood against Jallianwala Bagh, and I don't have to tell you that. And he did it rightly because it was a foreign award conferred by a foreign government. The other was, and obviously these award returnees are not awards. Sahitya Academy is not a foreign body, and it's not an award given by a foreign government. The other is Lutyens zone. Lutyens Delhi is not a physical zone, it is a state of mind. And in that state of mind, you can express the most crude disdain for a chaiwala who becomes prime minister. You can ask the Pakistanis to come and replace the Indian prime minister and still get away with it. So, well, it's a state of mind where you can be an Indian citizen and yet sign a document for another country professing that you're a citizen of that country.
Okay.
So it's a state of mind. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay. Since we have short of time.
Yeah, I have a very short question. This is referring
Okay.
to the...
It's just question.
Yeah, just a question. You referred to Al-Biruni's work on India, and in that context you mentioned freedom of expression goes to prehistoric times in India. And with all your peer-reviewed and international status, do you think ancient India was prehistoric? Because even our school children know that prehistory was a time when there was no language development. It was the time of the caveman.
Okay. So, Patrick?
Thank you. I'm slightly anxious about being the only person to respond, but I'll try and be quick. In a way, all of the questions connect up. On the point of Lutyens Delhi being a state of mind, I think that is absolutely correct. And I also think it's true to say that that consensus has been very significantly and is being very significantly challenged. And I have indicated in things that I've written previously that I respect that passion and I see where it's coming from. On the specific point of graduates, I think, refusing to pass out, I don't know what happened. I don't want to comment on something that I don't know about in a film institute. Right. On the point that Sadanand Bhume made of, well, if you think there's a false narrative being expressed and you think it's an unfair and unjustified narrative, I think really the only way of altering that is through dialogue of the kind that we are having now. And I think that the great tragedy in the war of ideas, the intellectual war in India, is how little of this kind of exchange and this kind of dialogue there is. You can go to literary festivals and you can have 5 people on a stage and they will be debating free speech and they will all have the same opinion. Now, unless you speak to the people who disagree with you and take an entirely different stand on it, you're going to get nowhere. The thing of people feeling under attack, I mean, clearly people feel under attack from different sides. I noticed that none of the questions that I had just now were about the question of the death of the 3 rationalist writers, and it seems to me significant the chilling effect that has on other people who are writing in a similar way, particularly if they look, as I said, to neighboring countries, to East and West, and the idea of writers being under attack. On the idea of prehistoric, I did not use the word prehistoric. I said prehistory, in other words, earlier history. And I think that however you analyze the earlier religious traditions of India, whether you call it Hinduism or Brahmanism, or whether you use kind of local terms for what would now be called Hinduism, that thing of exchange, of tolerance, of the idea that there was no such thing as heresy, the idea that people could express quite different conflicting opinions and that was acceptable, is something that I believe is very deeply rooted in Indian culture and I hope will continue. And one last thing, on the point, the Chaiwala point, I have to say I agree with you, and I even perhaps bear a small responsibility for this, because when I wrote India a Portrait in 2011, I think that was one of the first times that actually been a written reference in a book to the fact that the man who is now the Prime Minister of India had served tea at the chai stall in Vadnagar, which was kept by his father. And I noticed that after the book was published, this then became a term of reference. And of course, Manishankar Iyer made the fatal mistake of using it as a term of abuse and thereby gave plenty more votes to the BJP and its allies in the last election. So I accept that point, and I feel that I should pass the microphone to others to respond.
Patrick, you keep referring to the murder of rationalists. Please remember, they were murdered under Congress regimes. And the award returnees should have actually gone to the chief minister of those states, or the police commissioner, or the governor of those states. But they were attributing it to Narendra Modi directly, as if he ordered. Before he became Prime Minister. Secondly, these rationalists, whatever, they were also attacking Christian groups, Mother Teresa. Now, it's assumed, without police investigation, without the Congress-ruled state police actually catching the culprits. Nobody castigated them for not catching and nabbing the culprits. Who knows who killed them? It's assumed that Hindutva and therefore by implication Modi got them murdered. I mean, it's just as completely wrong. No, you didn't suggest it, but you are defending them and saying that's, if they had gone to the chief minister of that state, protested there, then their dissent and protest would have been valid. Nobody minded it. We all supported. When local writers locally protested whatever happened, but nothing of this kind. Now, when you attribute it to somebody who's not even remotely connected, then surely it cannot be called legitimate dissent. It's theatrical and it's partisan propaganda. And it's aimed at, mind you, just before Bihar elections, there's this spate of them. They stopped returning instantly because their political game was achieved. So I don't know how you can respect, and when you say we should discuss it as we are. See, here, you are here expressing a contrary view and nobody is going after your throat. Will the leftists ever invite somebody from BJP or RSS? Do that? And let me tell you, when I did so, organize some conferences where I insisted that there was, very briefly I want to tell you this story about this group from Liverpool, some professor from Liverpool who set up this Hinduism study group. And I thought, oh, finally somebody wants to study Hinduism. And what were they doing in the name of studying Hinduism? Same Tanika Sarkar, same Christopher Jeffrellet, Hindu bashing. And I insisted that those you want to bash, the least you owe them is to do it in front of them. Invite them. Hear what they have to say. Hold the mirror to them and tell them what they look like. Pralay Kanungo was here too. And I can tell you, it was not easy. Leftists do not allow anybody to even 2 inches space, and even somebody like me, who once upon a time was in that camp, completely erased from all discussions, debates, conferences. I can't get any space there. So it's they who are intolerant. It's they who couldn't stand the idea that BJP won. They're the ones who can't stand that Modi is prime minister. And they're making anybody who voted BJP to power a fascist and tyrant and somebody who delights in crushing Muslims. And their BJP is to be blamed. You know, this is my last point. You've never challenged. You know, आप तो 99 तक सिंस तक रुके रहोगे. हर टेक्स्ट बुक में, हर एकेडमिक ट्रैक्ट में आज फासिस्ट बीजेपी is equal to हिंदुत्व, is equal to हिंदू सोसाइटी. आज हम सबको फासिस्ट करार कर दिया है. और आपने कभी चैलेंज ना इंटेलेक्चुअली किया, ना कोर्ट में किया. मुझे कोई माँ बहन की गाली दे तो मैं सह लूँ. मुझे कोई फासिस्ट कहे तो मैं ज़रूर डेफेमेशन का सूट करके बताऊंगी उन्हें कि कैसे किसी को ये बहुत भयंकर गाली दी जाती है. आपने कभी चैलेंज ही नहीं किया.
Okay, 1 minute. 1 minute, guys. All right, before you get into a little cabal of applause, you're right, Madhu. But Patrick was very right in pointing out that from the right, whatever the reasons, there is no scholarship. There is just commentary without scholarship. Where are the scholars? Where are the scholars? And you cannot, no, I'm sorry, you cannot go to academia with pamphlets. You know, this is, and you were absolutely right to point that out, because nobody is going to take you seriously. No, I don't want some provincial scholarship, okay? I'm talking about real scholarship. Dinanath Batra is not the answer, okay? Rajiv Malhotra is not the answer. So find the scholars first, study the Vedas. There are 150,000, hang on, listen to me, all right? There must be 150 or more Sanskrit texts that remain untranslated into modern Indian languages. Go and do the work first.
want to add something? No, but please, we don't have time. We understand. The issue is so provocative, you know. No, please.
I think one of the key things of our ancient tradition of Shastrarth was we used to always begin with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti and end with Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Anger has its uses, no doubt about it. You know, as the ancients used to say, if something has no use, it wouldn't exist. So anger has its uses. But I just want to just point out that this is a historical process of change. No process of change is ever perfect and, you know, smooth, and there are always some rough edges. But one must admit that if you go through history, whenever any old elite has been replaced by a new elite, it's often been accompanied by a lot of displacement, a lot of violence. What is actually happening in India is relatively much better than many other changes of elite power in India. And I want to suggest something even to the right-wing side. You know, I normally never go on TV panel discussions. I'm not good at shouting and screaming. But one of the few times when I had gone on a TV panel discussion was to discuss the issue that had emerged after the World Science Congress. And I remember I tried to make a limited point. It was in We the People, the NDTV Barkhadat program. And I tried to make a limited point that what does it say about our education system that even high IQ people like journalists could not tell the difference between a nonsensical paper, to be honest, saying that we travel to Mars, there's no proof of that, and some very credible papers that we did discover Bodhayanaji discovered Pythagoras' theorem before Pythagoras did. That's very credible. Or that surgery was practiced in ancient India, that's very credible. The real fault, and that's something that perhaps should be taken as feedback as well, a paper like that Martian, the Travel to Mars paper ended up being used to tar other very high quality papers. I've read those papers, they are actually high quality. So that is something that's to be taken as perhaps as feedback as well. That's Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Focus on knowledge. There's a wealth of knowledge in our ancient texts. We need to study them. And we need to bring that lovely knowledge back once again.
Okay. Thank you, Amish. I thank all the panelists. We know the issues are provocative and this time is so little. But at the same time, we must keep in mind that all the issues, all the accusations cannot be discussed in a short time. And we should be disciplined in discussing all of them. So finally, I thank you. Thank you all.